Hi everyone! Welcome to the fourth episode of my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking video series. This month I am so excited to be joined by my crafty friends Steph Grimes, Audrey Med, also known as Law of Craft on Instagram, and Jossie Posey, who's one of the co-hosts for the Paper Talk podcast. And today we're going to be sharing our favorite ways to use large and bold sentiment stamps. Before I dive into last month's Instagram inspiration, I just have a quick announcement to make about my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking video for December. So, I had the idea of doing a December daily edition of Stretch Your Stamps, but I didn't really want to commit to using stamps specifically on like the second Saturday of December, which is usually when I would post my Stretch Your Stamps videos. And I don't really want to make my guest contributors commit to using stamps on that day as well, especially because December is quite a busy time for all of us crafters. So I decided I'll do a few special December daily Stretch Your Stamps videos during the months of October and November, in addition to the regular Stretch Your Stamps videos that will be posted on the second Saturday of these months. But I won't have any guest contributors for those December daily videos. Then I'll skip the month of December and I'll resume the regular videos on the second Saturday of each month again in January. So there will be some Stretch Your Stamps videos for December. They just won't be during the month of December, but I'm hoping that way, for those of you who are interested in making foundation pages for your December daily, you'll have the ideas in advance so you can use them for your December daily projects. And don't worry, if you are not a December daily person, you can for sure use these techniques for your non-December daily projects as well. Now, on to sharing some of the Instagram posts that you guys have shared within the last month using the hashtag SYS Scrapbooking. So this first one was from one of my guest contributors of last month. Last month we were doing alphabet stamps, and this one is from Diane Williams, and she used the Citrus Twist Kits Spencer outlining alphabet, and this is actually one of the stamps that I had used for my alphabets video as well, but I love how she used this to, as she calls it, stamp with pattern paper, and if you would like more information on that, I would highly suggest you check out her video because this is a very cool technique. And speaking of cool techniques, she also shared on the same day a separate video with a whole bunch of other ideas for using alphabet stamps, so definitely check that out as well. Jackie Malzahn, who is another one of my guest contributors, used her Ellie Studio large Jane alphabet stamp set to stamp out this coordinating background to go with her pad and paper and her photos, and I just love how playful and customized this one is. And Andrea Lake, who was my last guest contributor, used some alphabet stamps from Heidi Swapp and Paige Evans to make a custom title for her page. And I think fussy cutting out these alphabet stamps is a great way to use up those stamps in your projects. In my video for last month, I started off by showing how I like to use my alphabet stamps to create some custom phrases to fill in one of these heart shapes, and this is using the Ali Edwards alphabet stamp. And in the second part of my video, I shared some tips and tricks for how I like to combine different fonts of alphabet stamps together, firstly by stamping them side by side around these circle photos, and secondly by layering them on top of one another to create some custom title cards. If you missed any of these videos from last month, I do have all of them in my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking video playlist, so they're a bit easier for you to find. Sabrina Poole shared this pocket page layout featuring a lot of stamping that she did in just black ink, and I loved the contrasts of the black ink with the colorful photos that she had on the spread. And last but not least, Audrey Med, who is actually one of my guest contributors for this month, shared this gorgeous spread that she made using some fussy cutout stamped leaves, and she had even done some stitching in one of those leaves to give it more texture and detail, and I love how that turned out for her. Just a reminder that if you're sharing some layouts inspired by our stamping videos, make sure to use the hashtag SYS Scrapbooking on Instagram, and I'll pick out a few to feature in next month's video. And just a heads up that Audrey will be doing a giveaway of this wonderful stamp set from Ali Edwards and Laura Wanzik on her Instagram page, so make sure to check out her Instagram page today if you are interested in winning, and you can find out more details. For this month's video, I'm going to be sharing a few different ways for how I like to use large and bold sentiment stamps. I'm going to be using lots of stamp sets again from a variety of different companies to demonstrate how I like to use these stamps, so check out the description box below for all the products that I use. First off, I'll talk briefly about combining large and bold sentiment stamps with tiny stamps to make custom headings for your layouts, followed by a layout in my Life Crafted album featuring some stamp sets from Citrus Twist Kits, showing how I like to use these stamps to make some custom pattern paper. And lastly, I'll be sharing a stamp kissing technique with a whole bunch of different stamp sets, as well as another layout in my Life Crafted album featuring this technique. Steph, Audrey, and Jossie will each have their own videos sharing how they like to use large and bold sentiment stamps, so be sure to check those out after this video. So one thing to keep in mind with these large and bold sentiment stamps is that a lot of these stamp sets already come with some small sentiment stamps that are meant to be combined with the larger ones, and you can mix and match them to create some custom titles for your layouts. Citrus Twist Kits has a couple of these stamp sets. These are called True Life and True Life version 2. And you can see that these large cursive sentiments really work well when combined with these smaller type sentiments. Another example I have are these stamp sets from Ali Edwards. So this first one is the Pieces of Me stamp set. And you can see how easily you can combine the cursive stamps featuring Ali's handwriting with these smaller type font sentiments. And the same goes with most of Ali's story stamp sets as well. Here I have the Listen stamp set. Another great example is the Title Builder stamp sets from Ellie's Studio. I don't have any of my own, but these stamp sets are really great in that they have a variety of different sentiments and different fonts that you can easily combine together. And if you don't happen to have any of those stamp sets, you can always look in your own stash to see what types of sentiment stamps you can combine together. And the principles for doing that would be the same as the principles for combining different alphabet fonts that I talked about in last month's video. For the first spread I'm making in this video, I'm going to be using some stamps from Citrus Twist's True Life version 2 stamp set. I have one of the Instax page protectors from Citrus Twist Kits that goes into their Life Crafted albums, and I've printed out 4 portrait style photos the same size as Instax photos. 2 landscape photos that are approximately 3¼ inches wide and 2½ inches tall. And 1 large photo that's the same size as a Life Crafted album page protector, which is approximately 5 inches by 8 3/8 of an inch. I also have some pattern paper from Jen Hadfield's The Avenue collection. This one is called Aster Ave, and a piece of white cardstock that's just slightly smaller than that. Before I do any stamping, I'm going to start off by figuring out where I want to place my photos. So some of the other design team members from Citrus Twist have been cutting these Instax page protectors in half to create a cool peekaboo effect to the page behind it. So I'm going to try doing that for this spread. I also have some of these tiny word stickers from Citrus Twist that I'm going to use to decorate the bottoms of a couple of these photos as well. So one of my favorite ways to use large and bold sentiment stamps is to stamp a custom background for my page. So here I have chosen 3 dye inks from Altenew that will go well with my photos. These are Warm Sunshine, Chamomile, and Frayed Leaf. And I'm just stamping the word captured repeatedly on my background. When I'm doing my stamping, I'm making sure that the stamp overhangs all 4 edges. I just find that creates the most natural looking background, almost like this was a larger piece of pattern paper that I just cut down to size. I'm also making sure that all 3 colors are equally represented and spread out across the page, and I also like to overlap some of the words as well to give it more of that layered effect. Once I have most of my stamping complete, I like to go back in and do some second generation stamping to fill out any of the large spaces that I might have. So I ink up the stamp and I stamp it off first on some scrap pieces of paper, and then I stamp the remaining ink from the stamp onto my page without re-inking after that. And that creates a bit of a lighter image on my page. And by doing this, you can create a background that matches any pattern papers or photos that you might have. Just using my Tim Holtz distressing tool to rough up the edges of my page a bit to provide more texture. And once I start putting down some photos onto my page, I realized that I needed some embellishments to add more layers to this layout. So I'm just pulling out some of my leftover ephemera pieces from the Paige Evans Bungalow Lane ephemera pack and placing some of the smaller floral elements around my photos. Just adhering everything down with some Tombow Mono permanent adhesive tape runner. And I'll leave this page for now and add some journaling in a bit. I did use my Zig two-way glue pen to adhere down that little branch flourish that I had poking out on the right side. I just find that works a bit better in adhering more delicate die cut pieces. Next, I'm going to use this same captured stamp at the top of my full page photo. I'm using my Ranger archival ink for this because that's one of my favorite inks for stamping on glossy surfaces. And I'm just trying to decide what phrase I'd like to stamp here. So from this one stamp set, I can stamp out "this moment captured," "big plans captured," "this morning captured," "another endeavor captured," "this life captured," "another crazy day captured," and that's just with using the word captured as my large sentiment stamp. So the possibilities really are endless with this one, and especially when you're combining that with the other true life stamp set that Citrus Twist has. So I ended up going with the phrase "this moment captured," and once that's done, I'm going to start adding my journaling, which I've typed up on some clear sticker paper. I was a bit worried that the background on this page would be a bit too busy for me to adhere the clear sticker paper directly onto the page, so I'm just going to stick this on some vellum paper to tone down the background a bit. Here I'm just trimming off the edges of that vellum paper with my Tim Holtz decal trimmer so that it looks like it has a bit of a torn edge. And I'm going to staple this down onto my page so that I don't have to worry about the adhesive showing through anywhere. And now I'm just adhering that stamped panel onto my base pattern paper page. Just adding the date onto the bottom of one of those faux Instax photos, and that's my first layout done. I really love how I was able to match the greens and yellows in my photos with the inks that I had used to create this custom stamped paper for my layout, and because I used a large sentiment stamp, it didn't take too long to stamp out at all. Before I move on to making my next spread, I wanted to show you a few examples of the stamp kissing technique that I'm going to be using for that spread. So for this technique, I'll be using some large, bold fonted sentiment stamps. Here I have a few stamp sets from Kelly Purkey with large, bold sentiment stamps in them. And I'll also be using my Hero Arts background stamps and one from Tim Holtz as well. And these stamps are a bit older, like the Kelly Purkey stamps are ones that I got from Kelly's old shop before Paper Person, so these are all probably retired, but I encourage you to dig through your stash and see what you can find, and I'll be giving some tips on how to pick out some stamps to use with this technique later on. One thing that you'll notice as well is that I'm using Distress Oxide inks for this technique instead of my favorite Altenew dye inks. And I'll be talking about the reason why after this demo as well. So here I have my Q&A stamp from Kelly Purkey's In the News stamp set, and I'm inking it up with my Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink. Then I'm inking up my Hero Arts Tiny Star background stamp with the Blueprint Sketch Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to press my inked up Q&A stamp into that portion that I inked up on the Tiny Star background stamp. And you can see here when I'm pressing this down that some of the blue ink on the background stamp is transferring to my Q&A stamp. And you can see that here when I lift up the stamp as well. So when I go to stamp this down on my white cardstock, you'll notice that most of the stamped image is in the lighter Salvage Patina color, but where the stamp picked up some of the darker blue ink from the star background stamp, those areas actually stamp in the darker blue ink color, which I think is so cool. I'm going to share a few more examples using this stamp kissing technique. Here I'm using a stamp that says "I like this a lot" from Kelly Purkey's Guilty Pleasure stamp set as my bold sentiment stamp, and I'm inking this up with the Tattered Rose Distress Oxide ink. And I'm using the Music background stamp from Hero Arts as my background stamp, and that one's being inked up with Abandoned Coral Distress Oxide ink. I love the result that this one gives. It kind of gives me like a pink candy cane, Christmassy type vibe. For my third example, I'm using the Go See Do stamp from Purkey's Go See Do stamp set as my bold sentiment stamp. I'm inking this one up with mustard seed. And for my background stamp, I'm using this diamond patterned background stamp from Hero Arts. I believe this was actually a collaboration with Studio Calico back in the day. And I'm inking that one up with Ripe Persimmon. I love the subtle abstract look that this one gives. I think it's really cool. And this last one turned out to be my favorite. I'm using the Life Right Now stamp from that same Purkey stamp set, and I'm using that with the wood background stamp from Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous. And I'm inking these up with antique linen and gathered twigs, respectively. And this one kind of makes it seem like I stamped with wood, which is so cool. Here are some close-ups of the stamped images while I share some quick tips. First of all, the reason why I chose to use Distress Oxide inks rather than my favorite Altenew inks is that Distress Oxide inks are hybrid inks, which means they're opaque, while the Altenew ink cubes are dye inks, which are translucent. And by using inks that are opaque, I find that I'm able to transfer the details in the background stamps a lot better. Whereas if I'm using dye inks, I tend to lose a lot of that detail. I don't actually have many pigment inks, so I wasn't able to experiment with those, but I do suspect that pigment inks would work well for this technique as well. But you'll have to try that out and let me know. Also, I like to use a lighter ink for the sentiment stamps and a darker ink for the background stamps. And I like to pick two colors that are close to each other in the color wheel, but different enough that you can still see a noticeable contrast between the two of them. You also want to make sure that the ink pads you're using are nice and juicy. I had a couple of ink pads that seemed on a bit of a drier side, and the inks on those didn't transfer very well. My next tip is to pick large, bold sentiment stamps with a lot of solid areas in them. And in fact, you can use this technique as well with solid stamps instead of just sentiment stamps. I just find that if you have a lot of solid area, you'll be able to see that much more of the detail from the background stamp. And my last tip is to pick a background stamp that has lots of detail all over the stamp that are not too thin. I find that if the details are too thin, they don't transfer too well onto the sentiment stamp, and those details tend to get lost. And another thing to keep in mind is that whatever you have as your background stamp will appear backwards when you stamp it down onto your page. And that's because instead of transferring the image from stamp to paper like you usually do when you're stamping an image, you're transferring the image from the background stamp to the sentiment stamp and then onto the paper. So you get a mirrored image of what your stamp would usually look like. Now, that doesn't really matter when your background is something like stars or a wood grain, but it will matter if you're using like a scripty background or even this music note background, for example. Moving on to assembling my next spread, this one's going to be in a Life Crafted album as well. I've printed out a couple of photos at 2¼ inches wide by 3 inches tall, as well as a large photo at 4¾ inches tall by 8 inches wide. So my original plan had been to print this photo out at 10 inches wide so that it would span across both pages in my Life Crafted album. But then I realized that if I sized it at 10 inches wide, I would have to cut my sister's boyfriend in half. So I decided to size the photo down a bit so that I could cut it between the two groups of people in the photo instead. I also have some pattern paper from Vicky Bouton's Storyteller collection. This is the Medley pattern paper, and I'm just cutting off a strip to fill up that gap to the left of my photo. I'm adhering the left part of this spread down first, and I'm going to be making the part of the photo on the right side into a pocket later on. So for this spread, I'm actually going to use both the Life Right Now stamp and the I Like This A Lot stamp from the Purkey set, and I'm going to use it with the Tiny Star background stamp from Hero Arts. I've also printed out some journaling on some clear sticker paper. I'm just making sure that I have enough space between my stamp and my photo for the journaling, and it just fits. And the inks that I've picked out for this kissing technique are Fossilized Amber and Crackling Campfire. I just felt that these two colors would work really well with the warm tones in my photo, as well as the yellow pattern paper that I have there. So here I'm just inking up my sentiment stamps with the fossilized amber, and then inking up the background stamp with campfire, then kissing my sentiment stamp to the background stamp before stamping it down onto my page. Once I have my stamping done, I'm going to finish assembling this page. So the journaling gets stuck down directly onto the page, and I'm just burnishing this down with a burnishing tool. I'm going to make a couple of tags for these smaller photos with some Kraft cardstock. This is just 65-pound Kraft cardstock from Michaels. And I'm using my We Are Memory Keepers retro corner chomper to punch the corners of my tags into actual tag shapes. And these tags are each going to have one photo on either side, so that can house my 4 photos. I didn't want to add any string through the tops of these tags because I felt like I had enough going on already in that area with the stamping and the journaling. So I'm going to decorate the tops of these tags with some puffy stickers instead. These are some heart puffy stickers from Citrus Twist Kits, and these are the Hello Sunshine puffy phrase and icon stickers. Next, I'm going to make this part of my large photo into a pocket for my tags. And since my tags are shorter than the height of my photo, I'm going to stick some score tape to the back of my photo, just far enough down so that the top of my tags are still peeking out from behind that photo. And that's going to stop my tags from sliding all the way down into the pocket. After that, I'm making a hinge to close up the right side of this photo. So just cutting a strip of white cardstock to 1 inch wide by 4 3/4 inch tall and scoring it in half at the 1/2 inch mark. And then I applied 3/8 inch score tape onto either side of that score mark. Just removing the tape backing on the score tape for one of those sides so that I can adhere that hinge down onto the back of my photo. And I'm also going to apply some 1/8 inch score tape onto the left side of my photo, as well as the left side of the base page to close up that side of the page. And now I'm just making sure that my photo is straight on the page before removing all of the tape backing and sticking my pocket down. Just testing out my pocket here and making sure that everything works just fine. And stamping the date with my Heidi Swapp roller date stamp. And that finishes up my spread. I hope you enjoyed those tips and tricks for using large and bold sentiment stamps. I would love to see what you create with these types of stamps as well. So if you decide to try any of the techniques shown in this video, or any of the techniques in Steph or Audrey or Jossie's videos, or if you have a favorite way to use these stamps of your own that you would like to share with us, I would love for you to post your projects on Instagram and make sure to tag us using the hashtag #SYSScrapbooking. And if you have a particular type of stamp that you'd like to see featured in a future video, feel free to let me know and I'll add that to my list of future stamp categories. I'm also always on the hunt for new guest collaborators, so if you like using stamps in your scrapbook pages and would be interested in sharing a process video for a future month, feel free to get in touch. My Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking videos will be posted on the second Saturday of every month except for December, so make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel to get notified when those are uploaded. And check back every month for new techniques featuring different types of stamps with different guest collaborators. Thanks so much for watching and happy stamping!